Spiritual narcissism is a problem. And I mean a big problem. And it's not just spiritual narcissism. We see way too much narcissistic behavior today that is hidden in our Christian churches. Yes, it is possible for even pastors and church leaders to be narcissistic or to have narcissistic behaviors and responses. And actually, it may be the most dangerous when these kind of behaviors come from our spiritual leaders. So because of how dangerous it can be, in this series, we're talking about how to recognize the most common signs of narcissistic behavior, especially in spiritual environments. Now, if you missed part 1, go ahead and check that out here, because we're looking at 27 of the most common narcissistic responses and behaviors. In this series, we tackled the first 13 in video number 1. So again, if you haven't checked that out, go ahead and watch it first. But in today's video, we're going to talk about 14 through 27 as we break down more of the most common narcissistic behaviors to watch out for, what they look like, what they do, why they do damage, and how we can respond. And make sure that if you haven't already from the first video, you can download the companion PDF for this video. We have a standalone resource you can download right here. And that resource it goes farther about how to recognize signs of narcissism, different responses, and it links a lot of information about each of these responses we've already talked about. So if you want to go a little deeper, or you just want to have that resource available quickly instead of having to watch a video every time, you can download that. You can download it right here again, or you can go to spiritualabuse.institute. That's spiritualabuse.institute and look for resources. Okay, it's going to be on there where you can download it very easily. But with that said, let's go ahead and jump into today's video as we look at the most common narcissistic behaviors, and we're going to look at items 14 through 27. Let's get going. Number 14, narcissistic behavior is manipulative flattery. Sometimes when all of the negatives, the blame shifting's not working, the gaslighting is not working, none of the bad things are working, a narcissist will turn to compliments and flattery to gain control or to manipulate the victim. They might say something like, "You're the only one I can rely on," or "I don't know what I would do without you." And all of those things, they're saying them so that the victim feels responsible and obligated toward them. And that definition comes from a clinically reviewed article on Charlie Health, okay? But basically, manipulative flattery is a change in tactic. It's a change in tactic when the other tactics aren't going well. It's similar to love bombing, but it's not as exaggerated. And it could be used in the beginning of a relationship like love bombing, or like hoovering. It could be used after a relationship has ended to try to pull you back into the relationship. Or it could be used in the middle of an argument to try to soften the person on the other side. In my interview with Jerry Lawson, in the middle of our interview, when I had made clear what my boundaries were, that I was no longer going to be putting up with some of the shenanigans he was trying to pull, that I understood what he was doing, he had just a small portion, but it was this little place where he just started laying on praise about our work at SAI and why it's important and how much he agrees with us. Now, the problem is he had already disagreed with me on the things he was now claiming agreement with, okay? And it seemed to be a shift in tactic to soften my responses toward him because the other things he had tried weren't working. It was a veiled attempt to regain control of the conversation by making me feel better, okay? And again, you just got to be aware. A narcissist can go from being really mean to really flattering all at one time because it's just a shift in tactic. Whatever they can do to gain back control of the conversation, they're going to try it. The next narcissistic behavior I want to talk about, this is baiting. And a lot of people don't like it when I talk about this, but narcissistic baiting refers to a tactic used by narcissistic individuals to bait or to provoke an emotional reaction from somebody else. A narcissist will deliberately employ manipulative strategies to elicit emotional responses, typically negative ones, from their target to satisfy their narcissistic needs. That definition, again, comes from Anna Drescher on a peer-reviewed article on Simply Psychology. But baiting, it's designed to get a negative reaction out of you, because if you react negatively, you look bad and they look good. So some different examples of baiting. Baiting could be, again, laughing at your feelings or concerns. Baiting could be making blatantly false accusations just to make you mad, okay? Baiting could be guilt tripping. Baiting could be interrupting you, paired with deflection, not letting you talk and dominating the conversation. Baiting could be blame shifting so often that it just makes you mad. Baiting could be criticism and insults designed to get you to respond. And a lot of narcissistic tactics, again, guys, they can be used together. For example, blame shifting is a form of deflection, but it can also become a form of baiting if it's done to elicit an emotional response from you. So how do I know if blame shifting is baiting or deflection? Well, if it's mainly used just to deflect from what we're talking about, it's deflection. If it's used to try to get a negative response out of me, it's baiting, and it could be both at the same time. So often, these various tactics, these various narcissistic behaviors we're talking about, they can be used together by a skilled narcissist, and they can be really difficult to see and get your head around in the moment. So that's why it's so important that we recognize these and we learn how to respond to them. Because if we learn ahead of time, then in the moment, we may be able to recognize them. If we're not familiar with them ahead of time, in the moment, you're just going to feel like your head is absolutely spinning and you're going to start feeling like you're a little crazy. These behaviors are absolutely crazy making. Now, the next most common narcissistic behavior that we see in spiritual narcissism is defense victimhood. Okay, defense victimhood is a pattern of playing the victim as a defense mechanism when a conversation's not going the way that the person wants it to go. This is often called a victim mentality. And the funny thing is, the people who are most likely to criticize other people for having a victim mentality are most often the ones who actually use defense victimhood the most, okay? And defense victimhood, it's often a form of projection, okay? Victimhood is a form of blame shifting, according to narcissism expert Romani D'Ursula. She says it allows the ego to remain intact, to blame the world, and in some cases to get validation, perhaps from other grieved people or people who want to rescue them, okay? So some examples of this, some examples of defense victimhood would be the last part of DARVO. If you never heard of DARVO, that's a whole separate conversation, but it's an acronym that stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender, okay? Reversing victim and offender is a part of victimhood. I have done something wrong to you, and I try to reverse victim and offender. Projection can also be a way of doing that. So again, defense victimhood usually most often uses other narcissistic behaviors really to get its point across, to do that. But at the end of the day, they're just trying to set themselves up and look like a victim, because becoming the victim and shifting that blame is a defense mechanism. All right, number 17, this narcissistic behavior is what I call faux apologies, fake apologies, all right? An apology from a person living with NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, or just a person who has narcissistic behavior, might lack genuine remorse and is often used as a way to save face, avoid responsibility, and as a means to an end. Essentially, it's a fake apology that can leave you confused, doubting yourself, and feeling worse than you did before the transgression. And that definition comes from Susan Fishman in a peer-reviewed article on Psych Central. According to Michelle English, a licensed clinical social worker and a clinical manager at Healthy Life Recovery in San Diego, California, narcissists often use these fake apologies to regain control and to maintain their self-image. Because again, we talked about earlier, they really care what they look like. This allows them to do a couple of things. It allows them to shift blame and avoid responsibility. It allows them to disarm the other person and diffuse criticism. It allows them to preserve their sense of superiority and to keep up appearances and manipulate the situation for their benefit. So some examples of fake apologies that you have probably heard way more than you've realized. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry you feel that way is a fake apology, because they're not apologizing for what they did. They're not apologizing for how it affected you. They're basically blame shifting you. I'm sorry you feel that way is basically saying you're too sensitive. I'm sorry, but okay? It doesn't matter what comes after the but. If someone says, I'm sorry, but, they're not apologizing. And what comes after the but is telling you why they don't feel like they need to apologize. But because I'm sorry is at the beginning, they feel like they've done a good job and it's an apology, but it's not. I'm sorry if that bothered you. I'm sorry if that offended you. I'm sorry if is similar to I'm sorry but. I'm sorry if that happened. They're making you question whether it should have or not, okay? I'm sorry if is a terrible faux apology. And I guess I should say I'm sorry. That tells you they don't want to say they're sorry. They're not really sorry, but they feel like they probably should. Now, the next narcissistic behavior that we see so commonly is hoovering. Hoovering is a type of behavior where the narcissist tries to suck you back into their life, much like a vacuum cleaner sucks up lint. That definition comes from Sanjana Gupta in a peer-reviewed article on Very Well Mind. Now, some examples that she gives from the exact same article of this, she says hoovering could look like love bombing. Okay, it's a narcissist will suddenly love bomb you by showering you with affection, compliments, and gifts in order to reconnect with you after you've ended or distanced yourself from the relationship. It could look like apologies. The narcissist may apologize for past behavior and promise that things are going to be different this time and present themselves as a totally changed person. Most of the time, they're not. It could look like promises. And the narcissist may make all sorts of false promises to try to get you to stay. For example, a narcissistic employer who wants to retain you, keep you there, they might dangle promotions or raises that they have no intention of following up on to keep you there. It can look like guilt trips. The narcissist may try to guilt trip you into staying in their life or at their church. And for example, they may claim that you're responsible for their happiness or that they can't survive without you. That's probably more common in relationships, like romantic relationships, but it's definitely something that's used. It could look like manipulation. They may use manipulation tactics to try to control you. Things like telling you that no one else wants you, or that they might borrow money from you just so you won't cut ties with them until it's been paid off. It's anything to keep you there as a part of hoovering. Hoovering could be triangulation, we talked about earlier. The narcissist may involve a third party, like a mutual friend or a colleague, to basically get messages to you. Or they may try to pit that other person against you to create a sense of competition for their attention. Or, last thing, it could look like threats. The narcissist may use threats to try to keep you from leaving them. For example, they could say, if you're trying to divorce a narcissistic partner, they may threaten to ruin you financially or separate you from your children, okay? That's an example that Dr. Gerasmus gives of this. All of these are different examples of hoovering. It's a narcissist trying to get you back into their life or back into their orbit. Now, number 19, this narcissistic behavior, it's one that a lot of people don't recognize as a narcissistic behavior, but it's a go-to. According to Romani Diversala, this is one of the responses or one of the things that narcissists always say. It's not fair. It's not fair. Okay, and again, according to Romani Diversala, narcissists believe that there should be a set of rules for them and a separate set of rules for everyone else. When they have to comply or you enforce a consequence, it's a reminder to them that they're not special. And if there's anything that a narcissist wants to be, it's special. All right. So she continues, whether a friend's company is doing great, making lots of money, or they have to pay a penalty because they tried to game the system and got caught, you can expect a rant of it's not fair statements from the narcissist. And if you go back to our interview with Jerry Lawson, he started appealing in the second half of the interview quite a bit to it's not fair, or did you think it was fair to ask that question? Did you think it was fair to say that? And that constant appeal to fairness was a narcissistic response because, again, nobody wants to feel unfair. So if they can make you start questioning yourself, well, was I fair? Was that unfair? Am I being too hard on them? Then again, you're going to soften on them and they're going to regain control. Number 20, narcissistic behavior is just to simply wear you down. If none of the other tactics are working, they're just going to try to wear you down. And according to Dr. Susan Cross from a Psychology Today article, she said people with high narcissism, they can wear you out with their constant demands for your acquiescence. Okay, so what are some examples of just trying to wear you out? It could be interrupting you constantly until you finally just stop talking entirely and let them say what they want to say. All right. Or until you say what they want you to say. It could be making false accusations incessantly until you begin to wonder if they're true. It's anything designed to just kind of wear you down and beat you into submission. And in an interview with Jerry, at one point, he was going to keep talking no matter what, keep interrupting me no matter what, until I stopped. And I had to stop, let him get out what he was trying to get out before we were ever going to move forward. And it was just constant interruptions. And it was almost, it was a wearing down, a beating down before he got to the next one, threats and intimidation. That's number 21, threats and intimidation. And I'll show you how he used threats and intimidation in just a minute. But according to another clinically reviewed article on Charlie Health, narcissists may use threats or intimidation as a manipulative tactic to keep the victim under the control. They might say, if you leave, I'm going to ruin your life. Or if you cross me, you're going to regret it. Okay. So here are some other examples. And again, you'll see one of these examples in the interview that I had with Jerry. Hey, you're going to do what I want, or I'm just going to leave. You're going to do what I want, or I'm going to take my ball and I'm going to go home. And that's what Jerry did after he was just wearing me down. Hey, if you want to talk about these things, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not interested in that conversation, right? It's a threat to leave the podcast conversation. Now, after that, I set the boundary. This is what we're going to talk about, and I think it could be a good conversation. So if you want to have that conversation, fantastic. Let's stay. But we're going to have this conversation. And so it moved on. Now, another example of this could be someone saying, I'm going to ruin your reputation if you say anything. Have you heard things like that? You do what I want, or I'm going to take my ball to go home. You do what I want, or I'm going to leave. I'm going to ruin your reputation if you say anything, right? Those are examples of threats and intimidation. And often they're veiled, but there's no question about it. They're trying to threaten you and intimidate you into doing what they want you to do. The next narcissistic behavior, number 22, is isolation. Narcissists thrive on control, and they're going to go to great lengths to maintain it. They may use tactics like monitoring your communications, controlling your finances, or dictating who you can and can't spend time with. By exerting control over your life, they effectively isolate you from your support network. And recognizing these controlling behaviors is crucial to breaking free from their grip. That comes from a 2023 narcissisticabuse.rehab.com article. Okay, isolation in spiritual abuse settings could look like a couple of different things. It could look like someone getting you to volunteer and be at the church all the time in order to isolate you from people outside of the church, because people inside the church are going to support their narrative. It could look like encouragement to separate yourself from the world, or to separate yourself from people who believe differently than you, even if they're Christian. It could look like a supervisor encouraging you not to take opportunities outside of the church if you're on church staff. I was specifically, by a supervisor one time, I was discouraged from and made to feel guilty about joining a national consulting firm when I had that opportunity. And I was made to feel bad and kind of steered away from completing a graduate certification course from a prestigious university under full scholarship because it would, quote unquote, distract me from my work at the church, right? So those could be ways of isolation. They want to keep you around their orbit and not doing other things. NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, that are used to keep you quiet about things you've seen or experienced and to keep you feeling alone and afraid. Those could also be forms of isolation. But isolation, it keeps you in their orbit and away from other people and feeling like you need the narcissist. Number 23, minimization of the abuse or behavior is a common narcissistic behavior. They want to minimize their own abuse or minimize their own bad behavior. Making abuse or narcissistic behavior seem not that bad or like an overreaction or oversensitivity from you if you point it out. Those are all ways of minimization, okay? Narcissists systematically minimize anything that makes them look or feel bad. They make excuses for their bad behavior by blaming others. They may deny outright that they've done anything wrong or destructive. Narcissists know that minimizing and stonewalling is really hard for others to fight. Their minimizing reveals a double standard, though, okay? When a narcissist insults or hurts another person, they hardly give it a second thought. But when the narcissist feels slighted, it can feel like the end of the world to them. And that comes from an article on Psychology Today by Dr. Dan Newharth. Dan Newhart. And it's completely true, guys. This shows that double standard that they have. They want to minimize their abuse, minimize their bad behavior, and they want to focus heavily on yours. So here's some examples of minimization. A minimization could be saying something like, hey, come on, it's not that big of a deal. It could be saying something like, you're just overreacting. You need to calm down. It could be them accusing you of having a victim mentality. Or it could be them saying something like, that wasn't abuse. That was just accountability. That wasn't abuse. That was just good leadership. All of those reframes could be examples of minimization. All right. Number 24, we talked about this a little bit earlier when we mentioned Darvo, but the number 24th behavior is reversing victim and offender. When the abuser tries to switch roles, arguing that they're the real victim and making the victim look like the offender, that's reversing victim and offender. The abuser may claim to be unfairly accused and then say that you're making accusations to cover up your own behavior. This attempt to shift blame helps the abuser be seen in a more positive light while inflicting mental and emotional pain on the person who's already experiencing abuse. And that definition comes from Lakeisha Fleming in a peer-reviewed article on Very Well Mind. Some examples of that, some examples of reversing victim and offender would be things like, hey, that was a narcissistic response and we don't do that here. You got to stop responding like that. That was a boundary that I put up in my conversation with Jerry. How did he respond? He responded in a way that was reversing victim and offender. I put up the boundary and said, hey, that was a narcissistic response. We're not going to do that. And his response, are you bullying me? You're yelling at me and you won't let me talk. Why are you bullying me? When the truth was I wasn't bullying him and I wasn't yelling at him, but I was putting up a boundary saying we're not going to do this, okay? But he just wanted to reverse victim and offender and all of a sudden try to make me look like the bully. He literally projected what he was doing onto me. He ignored any responsibility he had, and he turned my correction and my setting of boundaries into himself looking like the victim and accusing me of being the real offender, okay? That's a very real-world example of what reversing victim and offender looks like. Reversing victim and offender could also look like in the Robert Morris SA allegations that happened in the last couple of months. It was, you had a person who said, hey, this person abused me as a child. And instead you had people, especially people in power, who were saying, why is she just now bringing it up? Okay. They didn't want to answer for Robert Morris's behavior. They wanted to reverse victim and offender. She's just now bringing it up. She must be up to something, right? Now we've reversed victim and offender. All right, guys, we're in the home stretch now. Number 25, the 25th common narcissistic behavior is using flying monkeys. You may be saying, Jeff, what in the world are flying monkeys? Well, according to Adam England in a peer review article by Very Well Mind, he said flying monkeys refer to people who carry out the work of a narcissist or an abusive person, and it comes from the Wizard of Oz, in which the Wicked Witch of the West puts flying monkeys under her spell. Now, my friend Natalie Runyon, we've had a couple of different conversations with Natalie. If you haven't checked those out, you should. They're always a treat. But Natalie calls these holy henchmen. Okay, she calls these flying monkeys holy henchmen, and I absolutely love that phraseology. But when we're talking about flying monkeys, using flying monkeys is like triangulation on steroids. Okay, the use of holy henchmen, it's the use of holy henchmen to control and manipulate other people. So here are some examples. At one point, I was fired from a job secretly, and I was basically told by this church leader that I could keep my job. I'd be given another job, and I'd keep a job and be paid if I didn't say anything. Because if I told the truth, the staff couldn't handle the truth of me being fired. I was also told that I was going to be hidden in a place where I wouldn't have any influence, and I could only talk to a handful of people. If I talked to anybody else about it, I'd be fired. My wife would be fired, right? And the handful of people they told me that I could talk to, those were flying monkeys, okay? There was no one that I could talk to and be honest with, okay? Everybody that I was allowed to talk to, they supported the abuser and the lies that I was forced to tell. Now, that was incredibly crazy making, and it's a good example of someone using flying monkeys to support them. A more covert example could be a narcissist trying to get you to believe something, trying to get you to fix something where they want you to change behavior. And especially in a work environment, they have other people who are flying monkeys that you don't know about who keep coming and talking to you about the same thing. So you begin to think, oh, everybody must see this and I don't, when really they're just coming to support what the narcissist has already asked them to support. And by using the flying monkeys, they essentially have people gang up on you from different angles, and you may not even realize it. 2 more to go. Number 26 is guilt tripping. All right, a guilt trip is best defined as the intentional manipulation of another person's emotions to induce feelings of guilt. That's the definition that's given by Lisa Gold, a social worker and founder and director of Gold Therapy in New York City. Right. So guilt tripping, again, it's just to make you feel guilty for anything that you've said, because when we start feeling guilty, we're going to backpedal and we're not going to deal with the initial topic at hand. So an example of guilt tripping could be combined with the "it's not fair" statements. It was, an example of guilt tripping in my interview with Jerry was I was talking to Jerry about a concern. We were talking about plagiarism. And at one point he just stopped and he said, Jeff, was it fair to accuse me of plagiarism? Was it fair to ask me about plagiarism? And I responded, of course, I think it was fair because what you're doing fits the definition of plagiarism. But by asking me, was that fair? That was guilt tripping. Because if I didn't know what he was doing, it may have caused me to go, wait a second, what if I'm not being fair? Well, I want to be fair. I don't want to be hard to deal with. Maybe I should back off. Do you see how guilt tripping works? Guilt tripping can look a lot of different ways, but it's always bad news. And the last common narcissistic behavior that we want to warn you about, that we got to recognize and know how to respond to, smear campaigns. It's smear campaigns. A narcissistic smear campaign is when a person with narcissistic traits or NPD uses manipulative tactics to attack someone's character. And they often do this by spreading false or exaggerated information to mutual friends and acquaintances, or they may share that information with family. The smear campaign may go to colleagues, or it may go to online communities. Okay, but here's the narcissist's goal. Their goal is simply to undermine the other person's credibility. They want to undermine their credibility and they want to damage their reputation and relationships to other people that both of you are connected to. And this typically, most often, is going to serve to elevate the narcissist's own status. So they're going to look better to other people through the smear campaign, and they're going to retaliate against you over perceived slights. Maybe you didn't even mean them as slights, but perceived slights. So their reputation is going to get better, and they're going to get back at you all at the same time. So some examples of this, some examples of smear campaigns in a personal relationship, it may look like the narcissist sharing personal and distorted information to your friends and family, where they try to paint themselves as the victim and really making you the antagonist who's responsible for this. In a divorce, it could look like a narcissist using accusations of fraud or infidelity or something like that that's false about their ex-partner. They could even say, hey, man, they were a substance abuser. It could be completely false, but they say things like that to make you look like an unfit parent. In the workplace, a narcissist may attempt to ruin the credibility of an employee or an employer, either way, either direction, in response to being fired, in response to a bad review, or again, because of just a perceived insult. It may not even be real, but it's a perceived insult. They might spread rumors about a colleague's incompetence or dishonesty to try to discredit them and sabotage their spiritual career. A personal spiritual abuse example of this, since my wife and I spoke out about the spiritual abuse that we experienced, we've had to endure some smear campaigns in multiple ways against us. But when we spoke to the church elders at the church in question to share our concerns, they literally came into the meeting believing false things about us that they had already been told by the very abusive leaders that we were bringing the allegations against. So they came in, we were already on the defense because they had heard smear campaigns about us, things that were absolutely not true, that we could prove were not true, and they didn't really want to hear them because they already believed them. Okay? They told multiple different stories to a variety of people about the reasons for us leaving the church and ending our employment, all of which were misleading or untrue. Sometimes they were completely untrue. Other times they were just misleading to make people think something different than what really happened. And most recently, we had a person who asked about our situation. They wanted clarity about some things that happened with us that didn't make sense. They were asking good questions. And one leader told them they were really, hey, we're really hurt by how, Jeff and Candace treated us. we're really hurt by how they've handled this. And the leader actually claimed, we even bought their house for them. And then look at what they did. Now, first of all, what we did was not wrong. What we did was pointed out sin and concerns and said, hey, let's deal with this. But when they said they bought our house for us, that could not be more true. That is 100% a lie. They never bought any part of house that we've had. But by telling those lies, and again, those are things that came back to us. How do they come back to us? Someone had to hear them. It was part of a smear campaign. And to give them the benefit of the doubt, if it wasn't a part of a smear campaign, they've said something that's led other people to believe that, because that narrative came back to us and people said, hey, we heard this from this leader, right? And again, it's just there are things that aren't true to make us look bad. All have been parts of a smear campaign against my wife and I. And look, because we've seen it in others, we knew that was coming. We knew that was coming before we ever pursued church discipline. It's one of the big reasons why we chose not to sign an NDA, because the NDA that they presented us with, it felt like a bribe, because if we had signed it, we wouldn't have been able to respond to any of these false narratives they're going around about us, right? So all of those together, we talked about 27 common behaviors that narcissists use, okay? All of them are super dangerous. Almost all of them are hard to recognize in real time. And my hope from this video, my hope from these videos is that you have learned how to recognize these common narcissistic behaviors and that you're learning how to respond to them. Okay. In the downloadable document that we're giving you guys, there are lots of ways that we actually give to respond to narcissistic behaviors as a whole. Okay. Because learning to recognize narcissistic behavior early and learning how to respond to it, those two things, recognizing it early and knowing how to respond to it, they're going to help protect you from spiritual abuse in a way that few other things can. So I want to encourage you, go ahead, download the companion document. I'm going to link it below. I'm going to link it in this video. Download it, look it over, and look over the linked information, because in those I linked definitions and information to help you go even farther than what we talked about in this video for all of those narcissistic behaviors. It's going to also give you signs of narcissism and responses that we can give to narcissism. Now, the responses that it gives, they're more general, but I'll go ahead and tell you this, okay? If you want to hear more about how to respond to different narcissistic behaviors, you want to hear more details about how to respond to the different narcissistic behaviors that we talked about today, and you want more than what's in that document, let me know in the comments below. And if enough of you want more information about that, then we can do more videos to break those down in more detail, okay? So let us know if that would be helpful, and we can make some more resources, more videos to break that down. But I hope that this has helped you. I hope that you are more easily able to recognize these common narcissistic behaviors and their dangers. Because when you do, it's going to help you avoid toxic leadership. It's going to help you avoid a lot of trauma and hurt, but it's also going to help you avoid spiritual abuse that's going to stay with you for a while. Guys, I wish, I'm not saying this because I'm an expert in any means, I wish I had known these things 5 years ago. Told my wife the other day, I wish I had known how to recognize these behaviors 5 years ago, because things would have went very differently. I would have never been as manipulated and controlled as I was, and I wouldn't have the trauma that I have today. That's our hope for you. We want you to avoid as much trauma as possible. And if you have been on the receiving end of narcissistic behaviors like this, I am so very sorry. You didn't deserve that. That is not the heart of God for you. And while this may have been a little triggering for you because it's reminded you of some of these conversations you've had with narcissists over the years that have been really painful, I hope that it helps you to feel a little less crazy. I hope it helps validate the trauma that you've been through. And more than that, I hope it helps you begin to heal and to be able to take back control and agency of your life, to know that's not going to happen to me again, because now I know how to recognize these things, and I know better how to respond to these things. So, guys, I hope this has helped. And if you have any questions, reach out, let us know in the comments below. Make sure that you download that guide, recognizing the signs and common behaviors of narcissism, how to respond to them. And again, guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. If you want us to dive into any other deep dive topics on this, let me know below. And maybe it's something that I can make another video about, or it may be something that we bring in another narcissism expert to talk about. But thanks for watching. Thanks for doing your own work of healing. And thank you for being a part of helping create healthier, safer churches. All right, guys, thanks again for watching today. We'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, why don't you check out some of these videos that YouTube really thinks that you're going to like from us?